Okay, welcome to the study hall for September 12th. We have just gone over the rules, regulations, and so forth, and are ready to begin. We've got more problems on assumptions. We have more of them on the slate from the last session or two, so I'm going to dive right into those. And then just to review, the multiple choice answers are here. You'll find them in your polling tools underneath your name. And then copyright, disclaimer, all of the following problems. In fact, today it's not except as indicated. Today all of the problems are from the GMAT Prep software. So all of these problems are from the free GMAT Prep software. Remember the difference. Official guide we cannot use as a source on here. Free GMAT Prep software we can. So, all right, let's go ahead and put a problem up there and have it talk about it. How about this? So remember where you're going to find multiple choice answers. You're going to find them here. There's more words in this problem than there are in a lot of problems. So I'll give you a little bit of extra time. Okay. You know where the choices are. Have a good time. All right. So most of you have picked answers. Some of you haven't. So please, if you have not chosen an answer, please do. Okay, so yeah, let's see. There's a J Hart who hasn't picked an answer, and then one other user. All right, so let's take a look. We actually have a very strong majority answer in this problem, much stronger than usual. So apparently people are champions today. But here's what people picked. So, you know, still not complete consensus, but we have very strong agreement on choice C. So we can probably get through this discussion a little bit faster than normal, but we'll see. So let's make sure we review what has been said about assumptions in the past couple of sessions. I might be able to actually upload some of what we wrote last time. So I can find it. Okay. So here is, let me go ahead and just throw this on the board so that we can save a little time with typing it. Here's what we had from last time about assumptions. Wow, that's big. Let me size it down. Okay, so here's the basic summary of ideas about assumption problems from the last couple of sessions of this study hall. First of all, what is an assumption in the first place? An assumption is something that is not explicitly mentioned but is necessary for the argument. So this is the big thing. It's something that has to be true. So one thing that you will see relatively often when it comes to assumption problems is you'll see wrong answers that are things that do support the argument but are just not necessary to it. Because there's a big difference between necessary and just offering support. So I'm sure you know that's a difference. This is the big deal here. How do you find assumptions? Finding assumptions directly is an interesting little trick because you're basically trying to magic the assumptions out of thin air. Like, you know, they're not there. The point of assumptions is they are not actually in the argument. So you're kind of doing this interesting act of trying to pull them out of thin air. But there's two ways you can do it. The first way you can find an assumption is if you notice a jump from like point A to point B, like the argument just goes from one idea to another one sort of without warning. And if it's a jump that really needs to be justified, then you need an assumption. You know, so if you say, this jacket is Italian, therefore it's expensive, you would need to have an assumption that all Italian jackets are expensive, because otherwise those ideas are not connected. Or if you can think of a reasonable objection, then you have to have an assumption that defeats it. So if you say, okay, San Francisco is an hour away, if I leave now, I can get to San Francisco in an hour. One possible objection to that would be like, what if there's lots of traffic? You have to assume there will not be lots of traffic. It is necessary. If there were lots of traffic, it would defeat your idea. So those are the two ways to kind of pull assumptions out of thin air. And then the sort of nuclear option here, which is very powerful but takes a little bit more time for most people, is this negation method. The power of this negation method lies in the fact that finding assumptions per se is not a very normal thought process. Like that's because remember, assumptions are things that are not there. And I mean, they're there, but they're not there. They're there implicitly. But most people do not consciously think much about assumptions in day-to-day life, which is why they are assumptions. On the other hand, people think all the time, every day, about things like, why might this person be wrong? Or why might they be right? And the negation method turns assumption problems, which are sort of a weird task, into thinking about invalidating an argument, which is not a weird task at all. It's a very normal task. So that's the power of this negation thing, is that it turns weird task into normal task. So, but the way you do that, you take the answer choice, you make it false, then if it destroys the argument when you do that, then you win. So let's take a look. And then perhaps most importantly, don't forget, when you read these kinds of passages, the worst thing that you can possibly do to yourself is think of them as academic problems. Because if you do that, it'll just kill all like functional thought processes in your head. So I mean, it's weird when it comes to things like rhinoceroses and tranquilizer collars because you don't talk to people about these things that often. But try your best to personally involve yourself in the situation. Like try to make it either a conversation or something that you watch on a show or something that in some way you are involved in. Because that's really what catalyzes the thought processes that work here. So involve yourself in the situation, like make it a conversation or a situation in which you are personally involved or a show you watched or something like that. And anything but an academic problem with a bunch of logic statements, because that is what does not work. So, okay, there's our takeaways. Let's take these things to the next page and talk about this problem. So here's another page. Here's those things. Okay. So the deal here is, let's just simplify what's going on here. You got these radio collars, and then they fall off a lot, they put them back on, and basically to put the things on the rhinos, you have to immobilize the rhinos, you have to tranquilize them, you have to, give them morphine or whatever. And what they've noticed is that the females that have had the collars put on them a bunch of times have lower fertility. So, I mean, this stuff here, all this stuff up to here, what is all that stuff in those black brackets? Is that part of the actual argument? Or is that something else? Like the black bracket part. Am I making a case in that part, or what am I doing? What's the purpose of those statements? Context, yeah, context is a good way to say it, right? It's background information. So what's kind of nice here is that the argument part of the argument is not very much stuff. And I mean, if you imagine this being conversation with somebody, I mean, if you're enough of a nerd that you would actually talk to somebody about rhinos wearing radio collars, then good for you. But if you think about the actual argument, part of this. I mean, the person you're talking to is not really making a case until you get past the black part. Like, until you get to here, they're not making a case. So this is where they actually start trying to make a point. So the deal is they're saying rhinos that have had their collars put on over and over and over again are less fertile. So therefore, it must be the tranquilizer that does it. So simplify. Female rhinos who have had the collar put on over and over again are less fertile. Therefore, it must be the tranquilizer that is reducing their fertility. Okay. So we notice a couple of things. I mean, what you should kind of do as you go here is if there's a restriction, like if there's a certain group or certain type of situation that you're limiting this to, you should of course notice that. And if there's, you know, other sorts of limitations. Like for instance, here we just do not care at all about male rhinos. It doesn't make any difference at all. Like we're just talking about the females. So, okay. Now remember, if you notice a jump in the argument or if you notice a possible objection, then you can get an assumption out of that. How might you object to this? Did anybody approach it from that kind of angle? Because I mean, there's more involved in this process than a tranquilizer, right? So we're just sort of jumping to the idea that it's the tranquilizer. But can anybody phrase a possible objection to that? Again, this is like, make this a conversation. Like someone is like, okay, when you collar these things over and over again, they get less fertile. Oh, it must be the tranq. It must be the drug that is involved in the process. It must be that part of the process. How could you object to that? Yeah, other factors is basically the idea. I mean, that's getting there. I mean, the one complaint I would have about that particular phrasing is that doesn't sound like a conversation. I don't think you would say other factors that can blah blah blah. Maybe I'm wrong, but in a conversation with somebody, you probably wouldn't use those words. But yeah, Rakesh, that's basically the idea. Although Rakesh, did you have that specific idea in mind before looking at the choices? If you did, then great. I don't think you probably did. But if you did, then great. It's more like the other reasons. Or yeah, like Arun is saying, it could be the tightness of the collar. It could be lots of other stuff about the situation. I mean, so in general, the objection here is like, what about, I mean, why couldn't it be something else about the process of collaring? Because I mean, there's clearly a lot of things involved in the process of collaring that are not the drug. So, and any of those other things could theoretically be the cause of this issue. So we need an assumption that it's not anything else. I mean, they can get more specific in the choices. Like the correct answer here is much more specific than this. But the deal is that when you're looking for something, so we need to assume that no other aspect of the collaring process is to blame for the issue. So let's look for that. Other aspects of the collaring process are not to blame. So A doesn't, I mean, the safety of the people putting the collars on there, we don't care. That's not what we're talking about right now. B, the fertility rate of uncollared rhinos has been increasing, not really a factor. I mean, because we're not talking about the uncollared ones. We're talking about why the fertility rate of the ones who are wearing collars is lower, not why the fertility rate of the other ones is higher. So, and more to the point, we want to judge whether it really is the tranquilizer dart that's going on here. C, stress that the rhinos may suffer as a result of being immobilized. That's a different aspect of the process of collaring. Like, it's not the drug, it's the, like, whoa, holy crap, some human being is tackling me and putting a radio collar around my neck. Maybe it's that. Maybe it's that reduces the hormones, right? So this is the answer that we want here. D, the male rhinoceroses, you can kind of stop right there. You don't even have to read the rest of this choice because we don't care about them. And then the tranquilizer is the same as it's used in working with other large mammals. We don't really care. These rhinos are the only mammals that exist in this argument. So there you go. If you come up with this objection, you are pretty much good to go. If not, you can do the so-called nuclear option here, which is you can negate the answer choices. Remember that it generally takes a little bit more time if you do that, but it's not a ridiculous amount of time. And if you negate the right assumption, you should kill the argument entirely. So just typing a quick review of that. The negation method is make the potential assumption false, and if the argument gets destroyed, then you win. That's basically the idea. So, I mean, let's just look at choice. Most of you got this problem, so we'll just look at the correct answer, then we'll jump to another problem here. But if you make C false, then, and again, when you make these statements false, don't try to memorize like formulas for how to do that. It's too hard. Just think about what it means if this is not true, kind of thing. If it's not true that the stress of being immobilized has little or no negative effect, if that's false, then that means that the stress is going to have a significant negative effect. So if you make this false, the stress of being immobilized and collared does cause a significant amount of stress. Or does cause a type of stress that has a significant amount on fertility, that has a significant effect on fertility. So if that's true, I think you guys can see why the argument is dead here. Because if that's a true statement, then it's not necessarily the drug anymore. I mean, it very much works against the idea that it's the drug. And instead, it's that. It's here we have an effect on fertility. So any questions about this problem? You guys did pretty well on that, so nicely done. I think we can move on to another one here. Otherwise, if you have any quick questions, feel free to type in the box. Try this right here. Remember where to find the multiple choice answers. That's here. That's where you find the things. Go for it. There's not as many words in this problem, so I'll give you a little bit less in the way of time. About that much time. And when it comes to critical reasoning, remember, like in the verbal section in general, the timing factor is a very highly individualized decision. I mean, you have to know personally, like, how long you take on these kinds of tasks. You have to know. So, I mean, it's not going to be the same timing guideline for everybody. Like, it really depends on how fast you get through other things. Like, if you are faster on sentence correction, you can afford more time on these things. If you are slower on sentence correction or reading comp, you cannot afford as much time. it's a balancing act. You should know individually how much time you spend on other parts of the verbal and then make a educated decision accordingly. So here's a timer. Good times. Go for it. Okay, time is up here. Make sure that you pick something. Again, this is a test where you have to pick a thing. You are not allowed to not pick a thing. So please do. If your name is Har or Ma, or a lot of short names today, or Shelby, well, Shelby is apparently away. If you are Har or Ma, please go ahead and pick an answer to this problem. Because remember, on this test, you have to pick things. You cannot not pick things. So, okay. We apparently have two favorites, so to speak, here, which are these. A lot of people like B, a lot of people like D. One of these non-responses is me, but the other three are you guys. If you are one of the three non-responders, again, remember that you can't do that on the GMAT. Okay, you have to answer the problems. If you sit there and stare at the problem, it will stare patiently right back at you until you answer it. So, okay. Let's take a look. All right, so what does this mean? Remember to personalize the situation, make it a conversation, make it something that you're involved in. It's like on the news or something like that. So, and always rephrase this. I mean, this is written in words that are not very conversational at the point. So, one thing I find as, and now we'll get there in a sec. One thing I find is helpful here in getting this into that sort of conversational mode is like explain this. I mean, if you know any 10-year-olds or 11-year-olds, this is kind of a bonus. But, see if you can explain the situation to a hypothetical, or if it's not hypothetical, that's even better, like 10 or 11-year-old. So, someone who's old enough to kind of get what's going on in these things, but who doesn't understand these types of wordings yet. So, okay. Like only injectable vaccines against influenza. Those are big words. Like you have to get a shot. Flu shot is what it is. So right now there are only shots. Right now, if you want to be vaccinated against the flu, you need a shot. And basically, parents, I mean, really, people's shots don't hurt that much, but apparently, according to this argument, parents are very afraid to have their kids get shots. But adults get shots, right? So a lot of parents don't want their kids to get shots in some cases. But adults get the shots a lot. But now there's like a nasal spray vaccine. You like spray it through your nose. It's not a shot. There's this new nasal spray for the flu instead of a shot. But the argument says kids are the ones who are not wanting the shots, or their parents are not wanting them to have the shots or whatever. Like the people for whom the shots are an issue for whatever reason are the kids. So what the argument is saying, what the speaker here is, remember, make it a speaker, or at least you're conveying this message. Kids don't really have issues from the flu in the first place. So this is where we start getting into the, like, because I mean these are sort of just background facts right now. This is not part of the argument yet. This is background. Like, I'm not building a case yet. This is just facts of the case. Background. All right, but now I'm actually like making my case, right? Like the news show says, or like the news anchor or whatever it is who's talking about this. The news anchors don't make arguments. Whatever, the article or the show or whatever, someone says, because kids, I mean, kids are the ones who would like be getting this thing instead of a shot. So, but kids don't suffer too much from the flu. Develop serious complications, like it doesn't get too bad, even if they get the flu, whatever kind of thing. So, even if all the kids got the nasal spray, it wouldn't, you know, do a whole lot. That's basically the argument, in much simpler terms. I mean, this would not be understandable to a 10 or 11-year-old, but this would. I mean, you know, the 10 or 11-year-old would probably not be able to critique assumptions or weaken it. But the point is, if you can put it into terms that a, you know, much younger person would understand, then it's going to be easier for you to analyze it too, because you've broken it down to like, here's what matters, kids, kind of thing. Okay. So, NL, this question here, I mean, the fact that it does deal with children is a thing, because children are like, I mean, obviously we have to involve children in some sort of way, but I would be very wary of trying to generalize like this at all, because what you're trying to do here is, like the way that you're asking this question makes it sound like you're looking for rules here, and that's what you don't want. You don't want like boundaries or guidelines around the answers that you can pick, because I mean you want to just think. You want to think about the situation. And anything that sort of inhibits your ability to think, or like any process that would supplant normal thinking, is not what you want. So I mean, it may or may not be true or whatever that this is a boundary around these answer choices, but you don't want to go there, because you want to just think about the situation first. And so it's kind of a non-answer, but that non-answer is the best answer I can really give you there. I mean, children are obviously a thing. So it's like in this last problem, you do want to think about female rhinos, not just male rhinos. But you shouldn't know that like as a rule. You should think about the situation in this problem and come up with it that sort of way. Okay. You hear a new dog in the background there. That's a new dog. So everybody welcome the new dog to the study hall. All right. Let's talk about, it's actually not a big dog. We live in an apartment, so we got a small dog. French bulldog. Okay. Let's talk about the problem. So, objections, I mean, as far as jumps from point A to point B, there's not a lot of that going on. I mean, there is a pretty logical step from kids don't suffer too much in the first place to, therefore, this would not move the needle a lot as far as public opinion, or not opinion, as far as like public health. So there's not really a jump from point A to point B here. But what there is, I mean, you could phrase an objection to this. If you're thinking about it, because I mean, okay, like as far as the kids are concerned, this is pretty airtight. I mean, if the kids don't suffer a lot from the flu, then if we are much more successful in vaccinating kids, it's not really going to do a lot, because we're making them. We might make their small sufferings go away, but that's kind of what the argument is saying. So if you're going to object to this, you would have to object on the basis of what if there's an indirect benefit. What if there's an indirect benefit to other people? Right, I mean, it's kind of an analogy here. It's like saying sort of stupid analogy, but it works. Like, mosquitoes carry around the malaria virus. So almost what we're kind of saying here is like if we took the malaria virus out of mosquitoes, then it would not help anybody, because it would just help the mosquitoes. You see where that's going, right? What about the people who get it from the mosquitoes? That kind of thing. I mean, it's much more obvious in that case because mosquitoes are not people, and so you automatically think in terms of like, what about others? But here it's the same kind of deal. Like, what if the children are like vectors of disease, that kind of thing. So if you think about this, you have to assume that that's not the case. Like the speaker is assuming that there's no benefit to anyone other than the children. So if you come up with that objection, and again, you don't have to, because you always have the negation thing. You can always go through the choices and negate them. But this got nothing to do with that. Neither does this. Affordable cost, not really a thing. Aha. Yes. Because, I mean, you have to assume, I mean, if adults got the flu mostly from kids, then that would be an indirect benefit. You would be preventing that transmission from occurring. So if you phrase this objection, you should be able to come up with D like dog. And then E, it's not effective with adults. Well, we're giving it to kids, man. Who cares? So if you don't come up with that, if you don't magic that objection out of thin air, then what you can do is you can always try this negation method. So if you make D false, then you get, this is a very nice statement to make false, because it says do not contract primarily. So if that's false, then that means they do primarily contract it from the little ones. So adults do primarily get the flu from kids. If that's true, then you can see this argument very quickly goes downhill, because then you know there's going to be a public health benefit. You know, you are taking, it's like taking malaria out of mosquitoes, then they can't give it to people anymore. It's like taking the flu out of the kids, they can't give it to the adults anymore. Any questions about this problem? I mean, a lot of people picked B. B was by far the most popular wrong answer. In fact, 75% of people who picked the wrong answer picked B. So maybe a little tiny bit more discussion of B here. This is saying that it uses the same mechanism. What that means, what does that mean in terms that a 10-year-old would understand? Like if you picked B, you probably picked it because you did not think of it in terms that a 10-year-old would understand. Because if you, we'll get to E too in a sec. If you pick B, it means you didn't really come to understand what it says, like in simple terms. So can anybody translate choice B into terms that our hypothetical 10-year-old would understand? What does this mean in terms that are less fancy? The new vaccine uses the same mechanism. It doesn't mean the same effect. That's actually not what it means. That's not what mechanism means. I mean, effect would be effect, or impact, or result, or some word that means effect. But nah, that's not what it means. Same way is more like it, yeah, it works in a way that is like the same. And that's what B says. So remember, you should also do this with the answer choices. I mean, you should also think of the answer choices in a way that your hypothetical 10-year-old would understand. So B is just saying that the nasal spray, the like nasal spray flu vaccine, works in the same way, or like it has the same medicines, or like, you know, it doesn't work differently. I mean, we don't care, right? This is not an issue. I mean, the issue is not how does it get rid of the flu. The issue is just does it. I mean, even if it works completely differently from, I mean, you can negate B. This should make it very clear why it's not a thing. Like if you negate this, you get the nasal spray works differently from the shot, but you know, who cares? Not, I mean, because the end result of getting rid of the flu is all we care about. Someone asked about E. Let's see if we can get crowdsource choice E here. E says the nasal spray doesn't work on adults. Can anybody tell me why that doesn't matter? Yeah, right. We be careful with not mentioned in the context, because there are a lot of assumptions about things that are not mentioned. I mean, you don't strictly have to be restricted to things that are there. That's another one of those things that's going to limit your thought process. So be careful about that. But yeah, it's what it doesn't strengthen the conclusion, Arun. Not really. It just doesn't matter. It's not a thing. I mean, if you go back to the argument, if you look at this, we are only talking about giving the nasal spray to kids. Like in this argument, we are not ever talking about giving it to adults. It's not even a thing. So the argument doesn't actually even go there. I mean, as far as we're concerned, it doesn't even have to work in adults. That's not the point. The point is, if you give it to the kids, here's what will happen. I mean, and if you look down here too, where we are only talking about giving it to kids. So it's not a thing. So there you go. Any other questions? Feel free. I don't see text in anybody's text box. So look at another one. How about this one? Remember where to get multiple choice answers. Those are here. I think I didn't, for whatever reason, the timer didn't show up. So here's a timer. Okay, go for it. Okay. If you haven't picked something, please pick up something, and then we'll talk about it. So you guys are doing pretty well on today's problems. The percentage of people getting these is higher than it's been last couple times. Maybe that means we are just awesomely effective at teaching things. Maybe it means that the problems are not as hard for you guys as a group today. But yeah, okay. So we do have a consensus answer again, although it's not a completely unanimous choice, but it is a strong majority in favor of choice C, like cat. But there are people picking other choices, so let's talk about it. What this says, I mean, the words in this argument are perhaps not as horrible as in some of the other ones. But you can still make this much simpler than it is right now. You can still simplify this. And again, hypothetical 10-year-old in front of you, it definitely helps you kind of keep it simple. So in Cravonia, and I mean, when it comes to like these random fake countries and stuff, remember the whole goal is to be personally involved in the situation. So you should get Cravonia out of there, and you should make it like a real place where you have a connection to. Like if you live in the U.S., make it the U.S. or whatever your country is. So make it somewhere that you can more personally think about. So like, you know, in America right now, or in California or something like that. In California, you know, jobs generally pay more if you have a college degree. If for workers with college degrees. So that's what's going on there. Current enrollments indicate that. Okay, and when it comes to like things like this, indications, you know, studies show something or data show something. I mean, you don't dispute those. I mean, if someone is interpreting the data in a certain way, then you can argue with that, but you don't argue with what the data actually say. So the data say that over the next 4 years, there's going to be a lot more people with college degrees. So that's a thing. You don't question that. So over the next 4 years, there will be many more workers, or at least potential workers, with college degrees. So the average salary is going to go up. The average salary of everyone in California will go up. I mean, that's the argument. Okay, I mean, again, you know, your hypothetical 10-year-old would probably not be so hot at critical reasoning about this, but at least your hypothetical 10-year-old would get it. Like, okay, people with college degrees make more. So there's going to be more of those people. So therefore, everybody's going to have more of the money. That's basically the idea. I mean, the argument's not too horrible here. So what about these choices? I mean, this seems like a pretty decently solid argument when you first look at it. I mean, this goes with that. The college degree goes with more money. So you might at first brush think that if there's more people with the college degree, then there will be more money all around. In other words, there's definitely no jumping from point A to point B here. And there's no awkward transition that needs to be justified. Like this does kind of come out of these. But if you're going to object to this, because I mean the only way to break this argument is to have some sort of idea that says that the pay won't continue to be as high if you have many more workers. Because I mean, if you kept the same pay, the idea is this would be an absolutely perfect argument. You know, because if they kept being higher paid, if you had more higher paid workers, then yeah, of course the average pay would go up. So if the salaries kept behaving exactly the way they do now, then this argument would be logically perfect. I mean, there would be no possible objection to it. It would be like, wow, you have more people that get paid more, so yeah, average salary increase. So therefore, if you're going to object to this, you have to object to it on the grounds that maybe that will no longer be true. I mean, objection, what if the salaries, what if the salaries stop behaving the way they do now? So, in other words, you need to assume that the salaries will continue to be higher for people with college degrees, even after there are a lot more of them flying around in the job market. So, I mean, and again, this is the difference between thinking of this as an academic problem and thinking of this as like a normal real world type of situation. If you think of this as an academic problem, you're not going to think of objections like that, because you're going to be too busy thinking about like logic statements on a screen. But in the real world, like, if I tell you that, I don't know, that like pediatric surgeons get paid like a lot of money, and suddenly there's going to be hundreds of thousands of pediatric surgeons all over the country now from schools, you might reasonably be like, hey man, what if that drives down wages? I mean, there's so many more people that it's probably a more competitive market. And you would probably have that thought in some sort of way. I mean, if there's a lot more of something, what if the price kind of goes down? So if you didn't have that thought, then, you still got the negation method, that's your friend. But you want to be thinking in the way that you would think if you saw this in the news or something like that. So here we need to look for some choice that's like, what if the salaries, we have to assume the salaries will not stop doing what they're doing now. So if you look at this, more than one college degree versus one college degree, that's not a thing. We're not looking at how many degrees people have. We're just looking at whether they have one or don't. The percent of people who attend college to earn higher salaries. I mean, make sure you read these things. Read these slowly if you have to. You should not rush through the answer choices. You should take the time that you need to take to understand what they are saying. Like, this answer choice is talking about why people go to college. It's not talking about the effect on, like, the workforce or the salary structure of the state. So this is not a thing. I mean, this deals with why people want to go to college, which is not what we're thinking about here. I mean, we don't care, right? I mean, they might want to go to college because the food at the college is really good, but still, whatever. I mean, as long as they're entering the job market with a degree, dude, we are fine here. So someone said that it's hard to understand this choice. I mean, if it's hard to understand the choice, you've got to slow down. I mean, because again, if you have a goal with what you are thinking about, you do not have to be fast with these things. I mean, for example, me personally, I am not a fast reader. In fact, I am actually severely dyslexic, and I'm a very slow reader. I mean, I don't even read words in a straight line. It takes me a long time to read these things. But I know what I am looking for when I read them, and so that's not the point. If you think you have to be constantly racing through the words here, then you don't. You don't have to. You just have to if it takes more time for you to get what it says, then that's definitely time well spent. So just be aware. What this says, I mean, admittedly, there are a lot of words in choice C. I mean, this is a very annoyingly wordy answer choice. But that's why you have a hypothetical 10-year-old standing in front of you, so that you can combat this whole wordiness thing. I mean, if you got to explain to your hypothetical 10-year-old what these things say. So right now, there's a higher average salary. Not due to a scarcity of people with a college degree. I mean, what that means in terms that are simpler is the current salaries aren't high just because there are so few college-educated people. It's like, if there was only like 2 pediatric surgeons in the country, then of course they would probably make millions and millions and millions of dollars because there's only 2 of them. I mean, they would be the highest bidder, right? So I mean, if it's that kind of effect going on, if these people are being paid a lot because there are so few of them, and there's like a competition for their services, then this is going to fall apart. So this is what we want, right? Because if C is true, then that indicates, like, the consequence of C here is that if you flood the market with college people, then if it's scarcity that is causing their pay to be high right now, then their pay will go down. Like, as soon as you have a lot of them, they will start making less. So that's the deal with C. And I mean, and L, I hope that helps, but take the time that you got to take. I mean, imagine a literal 10-year-old sitting in front of you that you have to explain this to. That'll help. Okay. D says the average salary for jobs that do not require a college degree. The reason for the condition in the first sentence. I don't really know what you mean. It's a bit abstract for me. Maybe you can rephrase what you're asking. I don't really know what you're asking. D says the average salary for jobs that don't require a college degree will not increase. I mean, we don't have to assume that, right? In fact, that would, if that were true, then it would make my case even stronger, right? Like if the average salary for everybody is going to go up, then my conclusion is even more likely to be true. So this is, ironically, this is something that would work the wrong way. I mean, if the average salary for these jobs, I mean, ultimately we don't care about this at all because we're talking about the salaries of college people. But this is something that choice D is a wrong way answer. Like choice D is something that if it were true would actually make my case worse, not better. And I mean, remember that assumptions are never things that work against my main point. So just keep this in mind if you, because several people pick choice D here. So, I mean, something that works against my main point will never be the conclusion, or sorry, will never be an assumption. I mean, if you think about what assumption means, you'll realize this, right? You would never have to, you would never require a statement that defeats your argument. So I mean, we're making the point here that salaries on average will go up, and D is something that would keep them from going up. We don't want that. More to the point, we don't care anyway because it's not the college crowd, but it's also a wrong way answer, so you be careful with that. And then choice E, we don't care where they got their degree. It doesn't make a difference because we notice that there's nothing in here saying that they have to get the degrees in Cravonia. I mean, they're working in America or Cravonia or California. But if you make it California, it will be easier to see why choice E is not a thing. It just will. The problem here is that it's Cravonia. That's the problem. The problem is Cravonia is not a real place, and so it's hard to think about. Like this says, you know, in California, the average salary for jobs with college degrees is higher. I mean, if you think about it as California, you will immediately realize that it doesn't matter if you went to school in California. I mean, these could all be people who went to school at the University of Wisconsin and then moved to California for jobs, but who cares, right? It doesn't matter where they got the degree. And I think 2 or 3 or 4 of you guys picked this choice. So be aware of that. I mean, this answer choice E is a great illustration of why you should take something like Cravonia, which is a meaningless non-place, and change it to California or other such thing. It will be easier to think about. It just will. I mean, when I see Cravonia there, this is just garbage. When I see California, I immediately know that I do not care about choice E. It's a thing. Any questions about this so far? Okay, if you do the negation thing, remember what's supposed to happen when you negate the answer choices. It's supposed to destroy the argument. So if you negate choice C, you get people with college degrees get paid more because there are not enough people with college degrees. If that's true, then this argument is dead, because if you flood the market with those people, then this will not be true anymore. So, argument's dead. A lot of people pick D, but I mean the negation method really exposes D for what it is. I mean, D says the average salary for non-college jobs in California or whatever will go up. I mean, this would actually help. This actually helps me claim that average salaries will be higher. So it's, I mean, no matter what you're looking at, it's not right. I mean, it doesn't strengthen the argument because it's irrelevant to the argument. I mean, the argument is about people with college degrees, but it does strengthen this statement. It makes my conclusion more likely to be true. And remember, we're supposed to destroy the argument, so this is definitely not anything. If you have any issues with this, I mean, the negation method is very powerful. It's the nuclear option here. I mean, it does, don't be afraid to take the extra, 20 seconds that it takes to negate the answer. In fact, you might, if you're not super successful on average at coming up with assumptions at random, you might want to make the negation thing your primary plan here. Like, you might, as soon as you see a question about assumptions, you might want to just immediately start thinking about negating the choices, because it does make it much more tractable. It makes it a lot more concrete and easier to think about. All right, let's see if we can jump to one more of these guys. What about how about this? So this problem that you're going to see right now, the words in this problem are horrible. I mean, I would have to read this argument several times because the wording is very hard to understand when you first look at it. But this is really one of these things where you got to take the time to make sure that your hypothetical 11-year-old will understand this. So don't try to answer this problem until you have simplified the argument, i.e., changed it mentally into terms that your hypothetical 10 or 11-year-old will understand. And again, it doesn't mean a 10 or 11-year-old has to be able to solve the problem. That would be a bit, on the quixotic side of expectations. But at least it would, you want them to be able to understand what the words say, which is definitely not happening with these words. I mean, the wording of this problem. I mean, I have to read this thing like 6 times. So give it a shot. There's a lot of words that are complicated also. That means more time. I mean, feel free to take additional time on this because let's be serious. Look at it. Okay, give it a shot. And don't forget where your multiple choice answers are found. Okay. Make sure you pick a thing that is a thing. There are a lot of non-pickers right now. So again, the words kind of suck here, but after this long, you should definitely be picking something. And don't forget that, yeah, sorry about the dog. I forgot to turn the microphone off. Don't forget that if you ever have a thought process that is not directed, meaning if you are not looking for something in particular, then you should probably guess and move on. I mean, in other words, if you're just kind of scanning the words and like la 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 la, let me read all the words, that's not good. Make sure that you are actually looking for something that is a thing when you are doing these problems. So looking for things, that's the key concept here. Make sure you are actually reading for something. Okay, let's run around. Does that mean you had a hard time picking between those? I guess I don't know what you mean, run around. I mean, you could mean let's talk about those, or you could mean I had a hard time with those. I don't know what run around those means, but you can tell me. Okay, so let's put this in simpler terms, folks. Here's the choices that you pick. There's still a plurality answer, but it's not a majority anymore. We've got, it's less than half. I mean, there's a signal in the noise here, but this problem seems to be harder for you guys. So let's take a look at it. Okay. So these words, man, they're terrible, but let's get them to be a little bit less terrible. Political advocacy groups have begun to use information services to disseminate information that is then accessed by the public via a personal computer. Oh my God, what a horrible sentence. Okay, well, information services is like, okay, that's like the internet, right? And if you didn't get that the first time, it's here's personal computer. So basically the deal is that political groups are using the internet to say things. That's what they mean. It means that political groups use the internet to say things. That's all it means. I mean, take whatever time you gotta take to get there, because that first sentence is just impossible to think about. Since many groups are thus able to bypass traditional news sources, reporting is selective. You got to figure out what that means. That means that, like, traditional news sources is like the TV news or newspapers and so on. So let's break this down. Remember, you don't have to keep the sentence structure in the original passage. I mean, if it helps you to break up sentences into smaller ideas, then do that. Like this, I'm going to pull this out of that sentence and say it as a separate thing. Because remember, you have a hypothetical 11-year-old in front of you. I mean, you cannot give an 11-year-old a really long sentence with lots of, like, all those or who's or modifiers or things like that. They don't get it. You have to break it down into shorter ideas and then link them. So what they're saying right now is that the TV news and newspapers, they're selective, meaning they don't report the whole picture. They don't report every perspective. That's the blue highlighted part. And then so that's this part. And then the rest of that sentence is a thing. A lot of groups are able to bypass those things and present, using the internet again, they can present views directly. So what we're saying in that orange part is that we're talking about the same groups who use the internet to say things. So the idea with those groups is that they can say those things directly to people online. In other words, they don't have to go through They don't have to go through like outlets like newspapers and TV. So that's what the orange thing is saying, right? They can actually talk to the people. It's like the internet is a giant town meeting kind of thing. So therefore, they are more balanced. I mean, the idea is that these things are not balanced. And if you didn't think of that immediately, then when you get to the conclusion part of this, you should start thinking about it. I mean, what they're saying effectively about TV news and newspapers is that they are not balanced. And so what we're saying is because they are not like, you know, selective reporting, we're saying because the political groups can just talk to you directly through the internet, what we're saying is that the coverage is like people will get a more balanced picture because they are not restricted to seeing what TV and newspapers want them to see. That's basically what this says. So I mean, you don't have to, obviously you don't have to get it into these exact words, but if you got to get it to this level of understanding before you can really do anything with it. So that's basically what we're saying. Now, more balanced picture. When it comes to something like this, there's a lot going on in this kind of passage. You might want to go right to negating the choices and seeing what happens. So let's try that and see what happens. Let's negate the answer choices and see what happens. Let's condense this a little bit so that we've got some room to write. So let's try negating the answer choices. Let's try negation. Okay, choice A. Whoa, so many words, man. Okay. Information services means the internet again. And enough people have the internet so that the groups can reach them as well as they could. Basically, the internet has to have the same reach as TV and news sources. If you negate that, you get, let's not try to write everything in red. If you negate A, you wind up with fewer people will get messages through the internet than through like TV and newspapers. The problem is that doesn't really address what we're talking about. I mean, what we're talking about is not how many people will get the balanced picture. We're just talking about the fact that it is more balanced. I mean, if you say, oh, well, not as many people will have access to it. I mean, in one way of thinking that might be problematic, but it's not what we are talking about right now. Right now we're just talking about whether there's a slant to the picture or whether it's fair or biased or gives everybody equal time. Even if there's a privileged set of a few people who get to see it, not the point, right? The point is just balanced or not balanced. B, people could get a thorough understanding of a political issue by sorting through information from several traditional news sources. I mean, you should probably be suspicious of this choice anyway, because this is a wrong way choice. I mean, B is saying that you can get a balanced picture from the TV and newspapers, which destroys this whole point. But if you try to negate it, it's going to go the wrong way. Like, B is you people can't get a thorough understanding from TV and newspapers. I mean, that actually helps us. This is, in fact, this is, when we negate this, we get almost precisely the case that we are trying to make in the first place. So this is not going to destroy the argument, and in fact, this helps us. That's bad. You don't want the negation to help you. You want the negation to kill everything. C, the internet news does not come from groups that share a single bias or a single perspective. If you negate that, you get all of the internet news, or almost all of it. Almost all of the internet news comes from groups with one biased perspective. I mean, okay, if that's true, it should be very clear that our argument is dead, because then the internet news doesn't promote balance at all, right? This destroys the argument. When you negate it, it destroys the argument, because then, in this case, the internet news is not balanced at all. So that's the choice that we want. And I mean, again, the negation method is your best friend here. And if you have issues with these problems in general, I would suggest going to the negation thing earlier, maybe even as your first approach, because it does make the task more normal when you do that. It makes it less weird and more tractable. D, the newspapers do not report the views of these groups accurately. If you negate that, you get TV and newspapers do, or often, the opposite of seldom is they do it often, report the views of certain groups accurately. I mean, that might, at first, it might seem to work against my argument, but it doesn't, because the point of the argument is that the reporting of the TV and newspapers is selective. In other words, they don't report all of the perspectives. It's not an issue of accuracy. It's an issue of they just leave out certain points of view altogether. So, like, even if their reporting of the points of view that they do report is accurate, that doesn't really make too much of a difference, because the point is not that we're saying they're lying about stuff. The point is that they are leaving out perspectives entirely. And even if they are honest about the things they are reporting about, the issue that they are leaving these things out is still an issue. It doesn't really affect the point. And then E says, right now E says most people who get information can identify the biases from newspapers. If you negate that, you get something like people reading newspapers or watching TV cannot identify the bias with which editorial bias is like editors, like the people who pick what is in there and what is not. So the bias with which the stories are selected or edited. This helps you. I mean, this actually makes our case if we say this, because this is another reason why we should have the internet. So this actually helps us when we negate it. That's not what we want. We don't want help when we negate. We want to destroy the argument. So there you go. NL, you've had some text in your box for a while. If you are typing something, please hit enter or whatever. If not, then delete the text. Couple people, there you go. Okay. Couple people are typing things. We're going to start wrapping up here. We're going to run. We should be doing a topic other than assumptions next time, but if you have any quick questions, feel free. If not, we're going to turn off the recording here in a sec. See it typing in one or two people's boxes. I'm going to go ahead and kill the recording. Thank you for attending. The next study hall is, I believe, in 2 weeks from today. So see you then, and good night and good luck. And as always, have a good time. And I mean, the have a good time thing is really a thing. I mean, as stupid as it sounds, a big part of this because remember what you're doing here is you have to get into these things. And if you do hate this test, you're not going to be able to do it. I mean, you're not going to be able to personally involve yourself in things that if you regard this test as your adversary, like your enemy, it's not going to work. You're not going to be able to get personally into the passages in the way that's necessary. So make sure that you might not love it because it is a test that is very high stakes, and asking you to be enthused about it is a little bit much, it's a little rich. But at least if you can get into it in the way that you would get into like solving a puzzle, then that's what we want here, and that's what's going to help you win the game here. Subasi, I'm going to go ahead and kill the recording. So thank you, good night, good luck, see you in a couple of weeks.